So if you'd indulge me, one of those stories, which is the story I'm proudest of in my journalism career, was about a woman called Claudette Colvin, who was moved from the bus, kicked off the bus in Montgomery several months before Rosa Parks, and who they were campaigning for. She was a young black woman, 15, 16. She was going to be Rosa Parks. She was going to be the one. But she was very dark-skinned. She was from a poor family, and then she got pregnant. And so they just dropped her. And this story was known, but it was never told, particularly, or rarely told. And I spent 2 years and I found her. And I interviewed her. And I felt that that was a contribution to a different kind of story. My name's Gary Younge. I'm Professor of Sociology at the University of Manchester and was a journalist at The Guardian for 26 years. I grew up in the 70s. There weren't a lot of black people in Britain until after the war. And in the town I grew up in, there were very few. And people would say, anti-immigrant people and racist people, go back to where you came from. Now, I was born in England. My mother was from Barbados, which was a British colony in the Caribbean. So people would say, go back to where you came from. Even the nicer ones would say things like, it's cold today, isn't it? I bet it's not like this where you're from. And I would say, well, I'm from down the road, you know. And there was no way for many people to imagine us as being British. So for example, my brother was a very good footballer and they called him Pele. There wasn't a British black footballer for them to refer to, really. And so, in a range of ways, we were told we weren't British. We couldn't be British. It was like a category error. To be black meant you couldn't be British. British meant that you were white to many people. And that was the main reason why I wouldn't have identified myself as British. In an interesting way, I've done a lot of traveling since then. I lived in Sudan. I lived in Paris for 6 months. I studied there. I studied in the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union for 6 months. I lived in America for 12 years as the US correspondent for The Guardian. And these experiences made me feel that my sense of community wasn't tied to geography, that I could feel at home wherever there were people who had like minds, who liked to read books and joke and drink and think and criticize and had a sense of humor. Wherever those people were, that was my home. It also made me want to identify with other people who were excluded, other people who didn't fit in. And so, and this is not inevitable, but there was a sense that, well, if they're picking on you, then you are probably one of my people, because I know what that's like. And so there was a likelihood that I would identify with gay people, Jewish people, other people who didn't quite fit in. Most of the articles that I've written were not about race per se, and they weren't about the black diaspora, but there were things that needed to be said or pursued, and there were insufficient numbers of journalists, both in Britain and America, elsewhere, who were in a position to pursue them. there were very few black journalists. And there were very few white journalists who were interested in stories about black people. So this was a huge section of the world that was not covered, unless there was a crisis. We have to understand racism a bit like a language with many dialects. So it's spoken everywhere. It's a global language, but it's not spoken the same everywhere. And so we have to learn different we have to recognize that people speak it differently. So anti-Semitism is a form of racism, but it's not the same as anti-black racism. And that's not the same again as anti-Asian racism. And so we have to learn to speak each other's language so that we can fight. And we have to connect issues of race to other issues. That issues of racism don't exist in a vacuum. They exist alongside issues of poverty, issues of sexism and homophobia. Now, we can't do everything all at once, and we shouldn't try, but we have to understand that being black is not an island. It is part of a system. And that racism is a system. It's not, of course there are individuals involved, but it's a system. And it's the system that we want to change. In a way, I think it has never been more important because we have social media, because we have so much disinformation, because of the threats to democracy that exist all over the world, our ability to engage people with stories that are true and that are rooted in research and that can be verified has never been more important. That an awful lot of decisions that people make at the moment, they make on the basis of lies, and they make on the basis of hysteria, some of which comes from journalism actually, but a lot of it is caffeinated and amplified by social media. I think in some ways journalism has been insufficiently curious and insufficiently critical, increasingly owned by fewer and fewer people who want to make money, not tell stories, not convey the truth, not reveal the complexity, just make money. And that if we look over the past 20 odd years, in Britain and America, many of them carried the government lies about the Iraq War, which was when trust in journalism really started to decline precipitously. They carried business lies that led to the crash in 2008. They carried lies about austerity. So people don't trust them. Similarly with experts. The experts are important. People who know about things are important. But it was experts who told us that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It was experts, some experts, not all of them, some experts who told us that the economy was fine when it wasn't, some experts who told us we needed austerity when we didn't. So of course people are like, well, keep your experts. What do you know? You get it wrong every time. So there is a crisis in credibility that is about our powerful classes, and journalism is now owned by people who are among those powerful elites. So the political class and the media class are seen as the same thing, and the political class is not delivering for people. People are poorer and more vulnerable and more mistrustful of each other even. And for many of them it's difficult to distinguish between the media elite and the journalist and the political elite. I think the way that you deal with that is to separate the media elite and the political elite. I think that the media organizations need to be more worried about their credibility with their viewers and readers and listeners than they are about their credibility with people with power. I'm not sure I would dignify it with the term method, but what I try and do is ask the questions that other people would want to ask, and to treat every subject with some empathy, to try and find out why people do things. There's a reason why people do things. And my job was to try and find out why. And so, that's true for Trump supporters, or Bolsonaro supporters, or people who vote for Brexit. I don't have to agree with them. That's not my job. My job is to try and find out, why do you think that? Where do you go with that? So if somebody, that's not always easy, because sometimes people say and want things that are really awful. And so to have that, to maintain that distance can be hard. But it is also my job, and sometimes it's a hard job. The best way that we can defeat, this is my political person now, not my journalistic person, the best way that we can defeat these things is to understand them. And we don't understand them if we just keep poking fun at them. We actually have to find out what they are. So to the extent that there was any method, the question I would ask most often in an interview is, why do you think that? Or, where did you learn that? Or, why do you think people say that? So I'm a curious person, and that's why I became a journalist. And I feel that that journalism kind of indulges my curiosity. But there's one other thing that I would say, which comes back to your first question, which is that growing up black in Britain, when I did, meant that I couldn't just dismiss people I didn't like, because they were all around me, and they were inconsistent. Try as they may, they could not hide their humanity. And in small ways, the people who might be shouting abuse at us one day might on another day be coming to our house. My mother was a nurse, and say, "Oh, my son is ill. Can you come and see him, because I think he's really not well, and I don't know whether to take him to the hospital."